today I am talking to Shakiba Moghadam, who is a PhD researcher at Portsmouth University. She's a boxer, she's a boxing researcher, she's a skateboarder, she's a fitness expert, minor celebrity, I think. And yeah, we're going to talk about all that stuff today. Shakiba, thank you for coming on. Nice to meet you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm a big fan of what you do, so I'm really happy to be here. And yeah, I'm doing well, thank you, on this cold day.
Yeah, I mean, so you published an article in the journal Martial Arts Studies, which was all about female boxers and their career progression and the kind of stories they tell and what we can learn about those stories. Tell us a little bit about that for people who haven't read the article. Tell us a little bit.
Yes, sure. So the article was actually part of my master's project, my master's dissertation, which I ended up publishing. And it's basically looking at the challenges that are experienced by female boxers and the strategies that they adopted to overcome those challenges. And the way I done it was looking at the basically come up in the sport, so them as a novice, and then going through the developmental stages of boxing, and then as an elite boxer. All the boxers had competed at a international level as well, so the experience was a lot in comparison to perhaps 10 years ago, where female boxing wasn't really that big. So it was really interesting to get their opinions and, go through their lived experiences from a research perspective.
So what were you looking for, and what was the most kind of the major thing that you found?
My main goal with that was to find out the predominant challenges that are common in female boxers and in different stages. For example, as a novice, the common challenge was proving themselves as female boxers, that they belong in this gym, that they are equals to their male counterparts. And then as they move through developmental stages, so where you have maybe between 6 to 10 bouts, it was that hardship of being accepted, but then also being able to get the right sparring partners that were in the same way, and then competing was really difficult for them, given that, again, 10 years ago, female boxing wasn't really that big. Even in the Olympics, it was only accepted as a sport in 2012. And so finding sparring was difficult for them. And then when they reached the elite level, they spoke about their disappointment, about what they expected from the elite level in terms of the support system that we're going to get. Of course, the support systems differed, but the common consensus was that there was this feeling of disappointment that it wasn't what they expected, especially at that elite level where you're competing for the country, and that their performance was always compared to their male counterparts, which of course physiologically we shouldn't be making that comparison. It was interesting, and for me it was a little bit disheartening, really, because I felt like with these girls that they had put in so much of their time and effort into that sport, and I feel like they hadn't gained the respect that they needed. But of course, I feel like within the last 2 to 3 years, female boxing has really taken off, especially within the professional ranks. And finally, female boxers are getting the recognition and the world that they deserve, but also it's needed within a sport like boxing.
So are there comparable studies of male boxers through their careers that use similar kind of approaches, and were there different discoveries about men, or is this a unique thing? You just kind of dive in, look at the women, but there's no kind of counterpart to compare it with, or is there a study that you would compare it with?
There was. So I conducted a study in 2016, but I published it later on when I came back to it. The only one study I found was that it looked at the journey of Olympic male boxers, and that was around, I think, 2016-17. And at that moment in time, there wasn't any study that was done with female boxers that looked at that similar journey in terms of the Olympic rankings and what it takes to get to that level. Which again, I guess I went in with my own assumptions that boxing is a very traditional sport. It dates back to many years ago, and so I guess naively at that point thought, there were loads of research in female boxers, because when I looked at the research, it was there.
Yeah.
But when you look a bit deeper and dig deep, there isn't much on female boxers in terms of what I was looking at anyway. And then I looked a little bit more in other sports, especially male-dominated sports. And there was a really great paper I came across that looked at women's rugby, mixed martial arts, and roller derby, and that looked at the challenges of female athletes. And I found that quite fascinating because as I was reading around this topic, I found I had to really widen my horizon in terms of the research I'm looking at, because frankly, there was nothing in boxing at that precise moment. And I looked and I found actually, I come from a sports psychology background, but when I went into sports sociology, there was a wealth of research actually tapping into that area, or at least with women athletes within mixed martial arts, within jiu-jitsu, that came up quite a lot, and within also boxing as well. So that was quite interesting to see. But again, a lot of them didn't reflect the British culture around boxing, especially amateur boxing. Much of it was about professional boxing. And so there is, and to be honest, that niche still exists, and that gap within the literature still exists, still there. It hasn't been bridged, especially when you compare it to male boxers. You know, there's psychological research, there's physiological research, there's emotional regulation research, but that worth of research is just not the same when you look at it from a female boxer's perspective.
I mean, is that because the numbers are different? I mean, do you have a sense of it in terms of quantifiability? Like, what's the disproportion or the difference between male and female, either professional or even amateur, I guess?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it definitely comes down to numbers in terms of, okay, where do we get these athletes to even research them? They are there, but I feel like they are difficult to get in touch with in terms of wanting to actually conduct some sort of research. Of course, not every single person would want to come forward wanting to research. Of course, you meet those obstacles just that you would meet with research. With boxing especially, so if we look at Olympics, women currently, or at least they did, in the Olympics that's just gone, had 3 weight categories in comparison to the 11 weight categories that men had. So that instantly that's a massive disproportion. And there's been arguments around actually there isn't enough women boxers for us to open the categories, but that's proven through amateur ranks that, and the Commonwealth, that the numbers aren't there now. And also I think a problem with the numbers isn't that there isn't enough female boxers, is actually looking at legislation and rules and regulations within other countries. So Cuba produces one of the biggest platforms, and a lot of boxers come out of Cuba from an amateur background into professional. But actually Cuba is one of the places where women's boxing isn't necessarily accepted. Legally, it wasn't accepted. And also from a societal point of view, it's not acceptable for a woman to box. If we look at a country like Iran, where, so I was born in Iran as well, as a female boxer, you're looked at as a criminal because it's a crime to box as a female in Iran. And so, of course, when you look at it from that perspective, I guess from an international perspective, there are certain countries that are not actually allowing the sport to be born for its women population. And that instantly will put a damper on the numbers for women's boxing. But even with that, there has been this massive surge in boxing, I believe, since 2016. Since 2012, but I know it went up when the Olympics was on, and then it went back down again. But I think as professional boxing has risen, especially in the media, and with likes of Eddie Hearn, signing female boxers, Mayweather signing on female boxers in America, it's really picked up in the last 2 to 3 years.
Okay, so there's lots I could ask you about that. So you said it's quite hard to actually find and make contact with and interview the boxers. Is there a general reason for that, or is it just kind of hard to get a hold of these people, or do they avoid, I guess, are they shy of being interviewed?
I think one of the problems that I personally faced, and then once I started reading around it seemed that it was a similar problem. And I think with that, and it wasn't just in boxing, it was in other sports for example, with rugby was the same. So my PhD is looking at elite women rugby players. And it was speaking out about the experiences, but with the worry of what if they identify me, because actually there isn't that many participants within this pool of boxers. So if you are a boxer who's from X ethnicity, X age, and from this location, and you've made the Olympic team or the England team, people can find out who you are very quickly just from those details. And of course, with research, we only give age, it's anonymous in terms of your participation, but those details were enough to identify who was involved. And so I know that for me, when I was conducting my master's project, people weren't coming forward because they were worried about talking about their experiences openly, and actually that becoming detrimental to, for example, being picked for a team or even being dropped. And that was interesting because male boxers don't have that problem because there's so many of them. And that was really apparent when I done my undergraduate project with male and female boxers. I didn't get that problem with male boxers whatsoever, but when it came to females, they were so cautious about being identified.
Interesting. That is really interesting. So, I mean, it'd be really hard to think of another possible methodology that you could use where you could get to speak to people, but because you can't say who they are or what status they have, because there's so many of them. Okay, so, and I mean, have you kept up with the situation in Iran? I mean, is that something that you keep an eye on as someone who's interested in maybe the professional and also the amateur and maybe even the gender issues? Do you look at that legal status?
I keep up to date with what goes on back at home, and I went back in 2019 to visit family, and that was my last trip to back home. And I had to be really cautious with everything, to the point where I actually I have a twin sister, so I took her passport with me as well, as a backup. And with the government there, they will look for anything. If you have a second citizenship, basically, if you have a dual nationality, they will look for anything to keep you there, basically, to put it nicely. And so my activity within boxing was very apparent online. I went off every social media platform. I got in touch with a couple of platforms to take down what they had on me in terms of boxing. And I tried to be as cautious as I could. When I went back, I found actually that boxing as a sport was really open to women. So within the parks, there were women on pads with either mostly women coaches, but sometimes with a male coach as well. And I tried to get in touch with a couple of people, but because I was only there for 10 days, it was really hard. But I did manage to kind of get insight into what was going on there. And I was going to the gym every day there, and the gyms there are separated in male and female hours. So the mornings are dedicated to men and the evenings are dedicated to women. And I spent every day in the gym training alongside other women and speaking to them about their experiences in the gym. And I naturally opened up the discussion around boxing. And it was interesting because they were saying, we watch boxing now because they have access to YouTube, which sometimes can be blocked, but they have access to all these different sites now that the government can no longer control. And so they were saying, we know there's women boxers that are from Iran out there, and actually we are interested in trying it out. And a lot of them spoke about self-defense and how that could be used as a source of self-defense. So it was really interesting, but again, from a government's perspective, it is still completely forbidden. They relate it back to religion, but again, it goes beyond religion in terms of, because that could easily be sorted out in terms of the hijab. You could wear long sleeve, and it happens in Muay Thai. There's a lot of Muslim women that compete in it. I think in terms of the government in Iran, it goes back to women being perceived with a sense of empowerment, being perceived as strong females rather than this weak second-class citizen that the government there portray women to be. And it was actually really empowering to see women really uprise and to risk, going out and openly doing pad work outside, that for me was amazing to see, and I think that was a great feeling coming back, was that actually something is happening and people are rebelling against what used to be, you know, not the norm.
Yeah, and I mean, one would hope, I mean, maybe I'm assuming too much, but like people who are into boxing, they get into boxing. And if you've got access to global media and you're watching men's boxing and women's boxing, I mean, that there must be a force there where there'll be men on side as well who would be like, this is a ridiculous law. Or is that too optimistic? Is it too simplistic?
No, I think in this day and age, especially in this day and age, there are so many male coaches, especially as well, that are open to the idea of women boxing. I speak to I've kept in touch with a guy who competes for the Iranian boxing team, and he gets his partner into it. His partner is now organizing sessions just for females to do simple pad work and bag work. And so there's a lot of there's this new generation of males, I feel like, that are supportive of this movement, not just within boxing, just women empowerment, and to rebel against, again, what used to be the norm for women maybe 10 years ago. And I really felt that when I went back. It wasn't the same as what it used to be when I grew up there. And again, that was amazing to see. It's a real massive improvement.
So you were a refugee into the UK, and now you're active and vocal in working to help to get the university to support and acknowledge the needs of refugees further. Is there any connection between your life status and your refugee status and boxing, or is that just like you like to keep fit and it was just one of those things, or is there a principled connection of some kind? Or
I think with boxing, when I got into it, I needed something, I think, in that precise moment of my life. So I got into it the second year of uni, and I was away from home, and home, you know, Portsmouth isn't that far from Southampton, but I was still away from the little family that I had. And I tried so many sports. I tried longboarding for a year, I tried wakeboarding, and I just didn't feel like, I guess, a community that you get in martial arts, especially in boxing, it's second to none. And I was craving for it. And then I did a kickboxing taster session, and then I watched the boxing session afterwards, and the coach was this militant, disciplined guy, Wayne, and he, you know, there was no joking around, and I really enjoyed that discipline. And I stayed behind, and I remember for 2 weeks, I had to just try and build up this courage to go up to him and just ask him, can I come for a session? And he was like, yeah, of course you can, but, you know, this isn't anything like a kickboxing student classes. We don't do socials, we don't do drinking. And I was like, okay, cool, all right, I don't mind. And again, in that moment, I was really taking a step back from drinking. I think I spent the first year of uni just drinking quite heavily, and I really wanted to step back from that kind of scene. And boxing really, it really gave me the opportunity to just invest all my energy into it. And I think with my experiences as a refugee coming here, it was a really hard experience, especially for a 9-year-old, to come into a country where I couldn't speak the language. I didn't know anyone here. I felt like an alien, you know, and you do feel alienated. And I just feel like I'm not an aggressive person at all whatsoever, but I felt like with certain emotions that you get, that I experienced a lot at junior school. I got angry quite a lot because there was a lot of bullying going on, and I couldn't express myself in terms of language. And so usually it led to some sort of fight, and usually, well, it was always with boys. My mum put me and my sister into an all-girl school to avoid, and it worked. I wasn't fighting anymore because there was no boys there to annoy me. And it worked. And I just felt like with boxing, you have to really control the aggression. And I love that aspect of controlled aggression you get with boxing, because not only are you making quick decisions on the spot, but you're controlling your emotions.
Yeah.
And if you don't control your emotions, then you're going to get hurt so bad. And I love that aspect, that discipline of it. And I feel like my life has always been very disciplined. And so I like the disciplined lifestyle, and I could see that in boxing. And then when I done it, it was literally the first session. I was like, yeah, this is my sport. I'm going to stick in this. And I just really enjoyed the learning process of boxing, you know, from my first sparring session to my first fight, to my 15th fight, to just the process of getting to know everyone. It was just such a raw sport with raw emotions. And I really found it sounds a bit cliche, but I honestly really did find myself in boxing in terms of, you know, who I'm really am deep down. Like when you peeled away the layers, and you know, you can't hide in a boxing ring. It's just you and the opponent. And that feeling you get when you're in there, you know, you're getting hit and you either come back or you don't, or controlling, if you know you're better than someone, is controlling it. So then you either win by TKO, KO, or by points, and not getting carried away. And I think so many of those aspects you can relay back into normal life. And it just never gets boring.
Yeah, no, I think that'll speak to a lot of people who've fallen in love with the martial art. Like when you were talking about the difference, I like the sound of the boxing coach, because the difference between the kickboxing class and the boxing class, it reminded me a long time ago. I went to an Aikido class, and it was quite convenient. And I went and I was checking it out, and it was local. And then they were talking about going to Birmingham for a competition, and they were like, "Oh, well, it's in 3 months, but by then, you know, you'll be coming out drinking with us, and you'll be everything." And I was like, "No, I won't. And literally, all I want from you is skill. That's all I want. I don't want anything. I don't want to be your friend, really. But you like the community. So, like with me, eventually, most recently before lockdown, it was Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I was like, this is so intense, terrifying, challenging, physically grueling and exhilarating. And then you just go home, and there was no obligation to hang out with them, or I mean, although they did that. Interesting. No, I think that really that connection with the intensity. So you have a kind of community, but it's a community for then and for there, and it's about learning about yourself. And you go out from that like armed into the world with insight about yourself and a sense of who you are and where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my participation in boxing actually led to not drinking for 4.5 years, which was a really great experience. I think I managed to, not that I ever had any problems with drinking, but I think you fall into this pattern of going out every weekend. And I think it comes with being a student, you know, you go out, and I liked not being, you know, that person that actually said no to going out, or I went out and I didn't drink. And then I met very similar minded people in boxing as well. And I actually ended up meeting my partner through boxing, who nearly knocked me out in our first session in sparring.
You were made for each other. Yeah.
I asked for it, so it's my fault.
So, okay, let me ask you, so I'll get a few things on the table. So just Googling around this morning and finding out more about you. So you're a kind of fitness fanatic. Your PhD research is on rugby players. I don't know if you ever saw it through to actually filming it, but you were kind of selected for, or you auditioned for one of these like SAS survival courses. I don't know if the pandemic ruined that for you, but like you got it for you. It seems to be all about the fitness, the intensity, the broad range of experiences. I mean, are these all connected? Or are they discrete, different kind of parts of your life or different practices in the world? What do you think?
I think they're all interlinked. I think because of the way it makes me feel. I just think from even a young age, I've always been after something that is just that I just get adrenaline from, I guess. And I don't want to use the word adrenaline junkie, but I guess more recently as well. I say more recently, probably in the last 5 years, I've come to a point in my life where I've just thought, you know, there's so much more to us as humans, and especially with our limitations, you know, with studying as an undergraduate, you know, when I saw a PhD student, I was like, wow, doing a PhD, that's, you know, I wonder if I can do that. It's too hard, you know. And then here I am doing it, and I think, yeah, it's hard, but it's not impossible. And I've just through reading and research and stuff, I just think, you know, we set these limitations on ourselves. I tell myself that, you know, I can only run 50k, but in fact I can run 100 if I want to.
Mm.
And so then I'm like, okay, that's great thinking about us, but let's do it. Let's see if you can run 100k. So I signed up to an ultra. And then I'm like, I hate the cold. You know, okay, what's going to test me? Have a cold shower for 30 seconds. Have a minute cold shower. Go in the sea and see how you react.
Mhm.
Of course, all of these are controlled, you know, in terms of safety precautions. I don't just go into it blindly, but I've really learned in terms of limitations. It's something that we just put on ourselves, whether that's physically, whether that's mentally, like they don't exist. Of course, the human body is limited to certain things, but there's nothing to say that I, as a person, can't do a PhD. I, as a person, can't run 100k or anything. And I think when I realized that in myself, I began to test it through these different avenues.
Mhm.
And so, for example, with SAS, so SAS Who Dares Wins is this reality TV show, if you can call it that, although I hate that term. It's 10 days of absolutely grueling experience of similar procedures that the special forces go through. And it's run by Anne Middleton, Foxy and Ollie and Billy Billingham. I basically applied for it, went through a 2-month process of getting tested physically and psychologically, got shortlisted, and ended up going to the Isle of Skye in Scotland for 10 days. And it was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. Especially, I was the smallest person who's ever been on it. So I weigh around 50 kilograms, I fight out 48, I'm 5'2". So things that 100 kilogram men were doing, I'm finding difficult, was supposed to be difficult for me. But I guess with the mentality I had going into it, I don't see myself how other people see me. I see myself as how I see myself. And so going to these adventures, whether it's boxing, whether it's, you know, mountain racing, whether it is SAS Who Dares Wins, I'm going into it looking at me from my perspective rather than from someone else's perspective. And I think all of this stuff interlinks because it goes back to my belief about who we are and what we can do. And I think a lot can be achieved when we remove that barrier that we set for ourselves in terms of limitations. And yeah, I'm always in the pursuit, I guess, a pursuit to find my breaking point, because at the moment that always seems to be improving or enhancing, or I'm just looking for it.
Yeah. Well, from my experience, once you get over 40, the breaking point comes to find you every day. You don't have to look for it. It's just like, oh, there it is. Okay, I'm broken again. Maybe that's just me. I'm not the kind of person who pushes in that way. A friend of mine has all these rowing machines and professional rowing machines and bikes and everything. He's always like, gotta come and train. I'm like, no, I don't want to just push my body to the point of collapse. There has to be skill acquisition. I think for me, that's why the martial arts, any martial art, is interesting from a technical ability, and with the technical ability comes some fitness or flexibility. I'm happy with that. I can't do rowing machines or exercise bikes or Peloton or any of that.
Oh no, I don't like any of that.
No.
No, not at all.
Real outdoors, the real seaside,
exactly.
the real ocean, the real, Okay. So what can we expect from you in terms of academic publications or conferences or chapters or something? What does the kind of future hold?
So in terms of my PhD, we've put in my first study, which is looking at mental health literacy in semi-elite women rugby players. It was such an interesting study to do in terms of, I guess, the findings. I don't want to say too much because then no one would read the paper, but it was really interesting in terms of mental health literacy. So for mental health literacy is basically our own knowledge around recognizing symptoms of mental health disorders, recognizing where to go for help or to who to seek help from, but also recognizing those symptoms and signs, not just in ourselves, but also in others too. And so mental health literacy, we measured that, we measured well-being, we measured distress and help seeking. And women rugby players had a very high mental health literacy, which was really interesting. They had higher than the student population. They were higher than junior doctors and nurses. And they were just slightly higher than college coaches in sport as well. And that was really interesting to find out, because it's a cohort that is rarely looked at in terms of they're not looked at all in mental health. And so that was really interesting for us, so myself and my supervisor, Dr. Paul Ganinsky, to find out, because it's an untapped area in terms of no one has looked into that mental health literacy. And for it to be so high was interesting, yet their attitudes towards help seeking didn't reflect their knowledge. And that was really interesting to find out, because it's left a question, why are they not seeking help? If they know so much about mental health and where to gain help, why is it that their behaviors are not reflecting that knowledge? And then within that research, we found subgroups within this quite niche cohort anyway. So those that identified as gay or lesbian were far less likely to go and seek help. Even though the mental health literacy was still quite high, the help-seeking behaviours were very low. And that was a really interesting observation. So it's really just digging a bit deeper in terms of finding out what are those behaviours existing. And then the first thing we've done with the PhD was to do a systematic review and meta-analysis. And that's another publication that hopefully we should put in this week. And that basically looked at to see what research is out there in terms of epidemiological research, looking at the mental health symptoms and or disorders within rugby players, so male or female. So we ran this search several times, and the most recent search identified 8 papers. And that was, for me, that was really shocking. Again, I went in with my own assumptions that rugby is another traditional sport. It's been around for so many years. Surely there's going to be a lot of papers around mental health, and there wasn't. Again, surprising given that the rates of injury in rugby, especially with concussion, that could lead to symptoms of anxiety and or depression, there was no research. Well, there was just about only, very scarce in terms of what's out there, and it's only been done in the last 4 years. So it is in its absolute infancy. So that was really interesting, but for me, it was kind of shocking as well. And it was really annoying because in my writing, I attached a lot of emotion to it, and a lot of my feedback in my writing was like, you need to remove emotion with your writing, because I was constantly referring to, this neglected population, or, that it's shocking with these, there's only 8 studies. How can it be only 8 studies? And so writing about it was really hard, because I just put out my emotions in writing, and after a couple of edits, I had to remove all of it. But yeah, it was interesting to see that there isn't anything really out there in terms of, there's so much out there in terms of physiological and or measures, but mental health, very limited.
I would guess there's going to be an kind of surge of writing about mental health, given what we're all living through, and given it's really prominent in media discourses as well, isn't it? I mean, and it's also just current. I mean, it's a force that people can feel now. We can feel it in ourselves and in the people we're closest to and the people we're separated from. We can feel the need for that literacy and for that environment to be developed. So it sounds like you've been for the last few years working on something that's will only be increasingly relevant.
I mean, I like to think so, and I've got to give it to my supervisor. The research that he does and the work he does is absolutely fascinating. He looks at mental health literacy in sport, but also in education in terms of university students, and university students at the moment are going through probably one of the most horrible experiences a university student could go through, especially as a first year. So it's really interesting to see the work that's currently being done. I think there needs to be a lot more done in terms of the support systems that are put into place during the pandemic for not just athletes, but different populations. For example, there's a lot of work I'm currently trying to do with the university looking at mental health literacy in the refugee population or international students, given there's a language barrier as well. So we're looking at getting in counsellors that could identify from different ethnic backgrounds, but also can speak the language.
Yeah.
Because we know once these signs and symptoms start to show, and if they're not dealt with, they're going to lead to far worse things. So it's important we grab it whilst we can and deal with it.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fascinating. So, I mean, and when are you hoping to? I should never ask. I shouldn't ask when you're hoping to submit your PhD. It's a very rude thing to ask.
No, you know what? I like that you acknowledge that, because every time I get asked this, especially my family member, because my sister has just finished her PhD, and all I've been getting is, so when are you finishing yours?
Yeah.
Like, she's full time, she's funded. I'm working, and mine's part time.
Oh, okay. Well, let's scratch that question.
No. I'm going to answer it, because we're coming to the end. So we're looking at somewhere between April to September 2022. So it is not far at all. And I get excited talking about the finish line now, because I can see it. We've got one last study to do, which we're just working on the ethics to submit. And I think the majority of the work's been done. It is just putting the last puzzles in and wrapping up this last study. And just I'm just looking forward to it all coming together in terms of the effects it will have, because it is truly laying the foundations within mental health in women's rugby. And I think there's so much to be done, and it's so exciting to be part of something that could potentially become really relevant in the future.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. I wish you very best of luck with that. It's very impressive. To do a PhD without full funding is incredibly challenging at the best of times. So, okay, Shakiba, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. That was really interesting, and yeah, best of luck with everything.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.